All right, episode 42 is here of the Press Box Podcast, and in this episode we're going to talk about our semifinal matchups for our World Series champions bracket from 1970 through 2019, where we crowned the ultimate World Series champion in that time period over the last 50 years. In this episode we'll take a look at the 1970 Baltimore Orioles versus the 1998 New York Yankees in the semifinal matchup of the American League side, and the National League will look at the 95 Braves versus the 1986 Mets. And when we get those winners, we'll be able to determine our championship matchup. So without further ado, let's get into it right now on the Press Box Podcast.
Okay, the Press Box Podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Ralph Miranda, along with my co-host, Joseph Miranda, and we're in segment number 3 of our Champions Bracket World Series 1970 to 2019. If you've been listening to our previous 2 episodes, a week ago today, previous Monday, and then last Thursday, we went through our round of 16, and then last Thursday, we went through our quarterfinals, and now we're ready for the semifinals of our tournament. Again, let me kind of bring you up to speed on in case you're just joining us for the first time. We decided to look at all the World Series champions from 1970 to 2019. Myself, Joseph, and our producer Nathan sat down and individually, without any input from the others, picked 8 teams from the National League. In other words, 8 National League teams that won the World Series during that 50-year span, and 8 American League teams that won the World Series during that 50-year span that we thought were the top 8. And then we compared our lists, and obviously if a team was on all 3 of our lists, we put them into the bracket. If a team was on two of our lists, we put them in the bracket pretty much. And then outside of that, we just kind of discussed back and forth who we thought should be or shouldn't be in there based on what the choices we had were. And as you remember, also you can go to Twitter. In fact, if you're listening right now, go ahead and hop on Twitter. Our Twitter account is @PressBoxPod, @PressBoxPod, no spaces, as you know. And you'll see the bracket there. So in the American League, we had the New York Yankees of 1998 were the first seed. They took on the 1974 Oakland Athletics, who were the 8th seed. The 2009 New York Yankees, 4th seed, took on the 1977 New York Yankees, the 5th seed. The 1984 Detroit Tigers, the 3rd seed, took on the 6th seed 2004 Boston Red Sox, and the number 2 seed 1970 Baltimore Orioles took on the 7th seed 1992 Toronto Blue Jays. The 1998 Yankees advanced, winning 4-2. The 2009 New York Yankees advanced, winning 4-2. In the bottom half of the bracket, the 2004 Boston Red Sox, the 6th seed, advanced, winning 4-3. And the 1970 Baltimore Orioles, the 2nd seed, advanced, winning 4-1. In those quarterfinal matchups, as you listened to last Thursday, the 1998 Yankees defeated the 2009 New York Yankees 4-3 and advanced to the semifinals, where they'll face the 1970 Baltimore Orioles, the 2nd seed, who defeated the 2004 Boston Red Sox 4-2. So in the semifinals in the American League, it's the 1998 Yankees, the number 1 seed, versus the 1970 Baltimore Orioles, the number 2 seed. We're going to start today in the National League, so I'll go through that for you. Our number 1 seed was the 1975 Cincinnati Reds. They took on the 1995 Atlanta Braves, the 8th seed. The 4th seed 2012 San Francisco Giants took on the 5th seed 2019 Washington Nationals. The 3-seeded 2016 Chicago Cubs took on the 6th seed 2001 Arizona Diamondbacks. And the number 2 seed 1986 New York Mets took on the number 7 seed 2008 Philadelphia Phillies. In our round of 16, the 8th seed Atlanta Braves of 95 upset the 1975 Cincinnati Reds 4-2. The Washington Nationals of 2019 defeated the San Francisco Giants 4-3, the 2012 Giants. In the bottom half of the bracket, the 6th seed 2001 Arizona Diamondbacks defeated the 2016 Chicago Cubs 4-3. And the number 2 seed 1986 New York Mets defeated the 2008 Philadelphia Phillies 4-3. As you heard last Thursday in our quarterfinal bracket, the 1995 Atlanta Braves advanced to the semifinals, winning 4-2 over the Nationals, and the 1986 New York Mets, the second seed, advanced to the semifinals, defeating the 2001 Arizona Diamondbacks 4-3. So the semifinals in the National League, the number 2 seed New York Mets taking on the 1995 Atlanta Braves. So that catches you up to date. Make sure you stay involved with us on Twitter. You can view the brackets there. You can find a lot of the other interactive things that we've developed for this particular series. And remember, we're going to be doing this for the National Football League and for the NBA coming up here in a few weeks. So it'll be exciting times as we go through what we think the best of the best is in each of the major sports. So that having been said, I'll turn it over to Joseph and let him start. Joseph, we've got the semifinals in the... Oh, that's right. I'll turn it over to Nathan. Excuse me. Nathan will give us the recap here. We've got the 95 Atlanta Braves taking on the 1986 New York Mets.
Yes. The 95 Braves won 90 games, lost 54, first in the NL East. They won the divisional series 3-1 over the Colorado Rockies. They swept the championship series at 4 games over the Cincinnati Reds. And they won the World Series 4-2 over the Cleveland Indians. In the 1986 New York Mets won 108 games, lost 54, first in the NL East. Won the championship series 4-2 over the Houston Astros, and they won the World Series 4-3 over the Boston Red Sox.
Okay, so Joseph, you want to get us kicked off there?
Okay. And as we talked about on the last episode as well, 1995 season starting a bit late because of the strike.
Right.
When you go by winning percentage, Braves more like a 103 to 104 win team.
Right.
Just to note that as well if you didn't have that last time. But let's start again with the pitching as we usually do. We've talked about this before, but the Braves pitching staff, Greg Maddux with an all-time great year in 95. Really the leader of the Braves staff. Then you have Glavine and Smoltz. The Mets, Dwight Gooden, who won the Cy Young in 85.
Right.
He was what, like 24 and
24 and 4.
24 and 4.
And he had a 1.6 something ERA that year.
Yeah. So coming off that year, 86 still had a good year, won 17 games, the 2.84 ERA, which wasn't quite as dominant as he was the year before.
Right.
And you have Ron Darling and Bob Ojeda, Sid Fernandez. Just right off the bat, just looking here, I think probably have to give it to the Braves in terms of starting pitching staff. I know you have some stats there to kind of back it up, but I think they led in a lot of categories that year, right? 95.
Yeah, they did. I mean, if you look at the pitching staffs, looking at ERA, earned run average, complete games, hits allowed, and runs allowed. The Braves were number 1 in the National League that year in all categories. Their ERA was 3.344. They had 18 complete games as a staff. They only allowed 1,184 hits, and they only gave up 540 runs. So they were top to bottom of the National League in those categories. The Mets, however, had a pretty solid pitching staff as well. Their ERA that year was only 0.311, which was better than the Braves, and of course they were first in the National League. Interestingly, though, and I don't know how you would weigh this statistic or not, the Mets had 27 complete games as a staff in 1986, which was 9 more than the Braves, but were only second in the league that year in that category. They did allow 1,304 hits, which was third in the league, and they allowed 578 runs, which was second in the league. So, not too shabby, but obviously not number 1 in all categories.
I think the complete games thing, the 80s guys are still going deeper, and
right.
Throwing a complete game was more commonplace than even the 90s, and now it's very rare, but it'd be just not related, but interesting to see who led the league in complete games this past year, what team.
It would be
how many it was.
Yeah, it would be
like
interesting.
3 or 4, I don't know.
Probably not many. Yeah.
I'll find that out for you.
Yeah,
Cruz is on it. So those are stats can I tell you the story. Both good staffs. When you look at the bullpen, let's see here. Mets, Jesse Orosco with 81 innings, kind of led them in the bullpen with the 2.33 ERA.
Mm-hmm.
Left-hander, who's very valuable out of the pen. The Braves, Greg McMichael threw 80 innings at a 2.79. Overall, the Mets ERA of the top 4 relievers here of the innings was lower. You had a 3 in the 2s, 3. Braves, you had 2 3s and then a 6. So fairly even again. I'd maybe give the edge a little bit here to the Mets and the bullpen. And then closing, McDowell and Walters, Mark Wohlers, excuse me, with the Braves at 25 saves, Roger McDowell at 22.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, though, if you look at the Mets, because I know this because obviously I lived in that era, but they actually had two closers. I mean, Jesse Orosco was actually used as a closer from the left side of the mound. So the Mets actually had two guys that they could go to in safe situations, and that's kind of why McDowell didn't have as many saves as maybe some other pitchers may have had. So the Mets had that option to go to, whereas the Braves really did not have that option because Bourbon and Bedrosian were not guys that you could throw in there to close out a game. Another few stats that I thought were pretty interesting. I don't know if these mean anything to you or not, but again, comparing the pitching staffs, the WHIP, which is walks and hits per innings pitched, the Mets were 1.222. Braves were 1.254. The Mets had about 6.5 strikeouts per 9 innings. The Braves won more than that, about 7.5. The Mets walked roughly 3 batters per 9 innings. So did the Braves. The Mets allowed basically 8 hits per 9 innings. The Braves did as well. And the Mets ERA plus, which again is kind of an interesting stat, which I don't want to get into too much of it. It adjusts the ERA for the league average and for pitching in their own ballpark, which I don't want to get into, but the Braves were a little bit better than the Mets in that category. So, I mean, as you said, they're all pretty equal, but I think the eye test would tell you that maybe if you had to pick a staff, you'd go with the Braves.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If you want some information on that complete game
Yeah.
This article is a pretty extensive article about ESPN looking at the decline of complete games over the past 30 years, and it breaks down to like what's been lost to increased offense, what's been lost to safety. I guess they mean if they could have gone, but the number of pitches.
Counts and stuff.
Right.
But anyways, it says that just this article was from March 21st, 2019. It says 30 years ago there were 622 complete games, roughly 4 every day, and there were 42 all of last year. I guess they mean 2018.
Wow.
It says this decline, which is certainly not a total revelation, steeped over the 3 years prior from 104 in 2015 to 83 in 2016, 59 in 2017, and then 42 in 2018. But if you look at last year, 2019, I don't think you asked this question, Joseph, but the pitchers with the most complete games, no one had more than 3, and that was in the American League, Shane Bieber and Lucas Giolito.
Yeah.
And then in the National League, 3 guys had 2 complete games. Sandy Alcantara, Walker Buehler, and Zach Eflin.
Okay, now, and here's an interesting thing about, no offense to those men and their families, but those guys I've never heard of before. My point being, just what you said, is that if you have a guy like Clayton Kershaw or, one of these guys, you're more likely to lift him if you're afraid. These other guys, they don't really think about them the same way. So they're the ones more likely to throw the complete games.
Yeah. Sorry.
Plus, those guys could be 3rd or 4th starters, and you want to get innings out of those guys. So
your bullpen one night.
Right. So it's an interesting factor that how that's declined, and I guess that's why it's hard to compare the '86 Mets to the Braves in that category, because the decline was obviously starting to become an issue. Maybe I don't know, but
all right. So taking a look at the offense here, I think upon looking at it, looking at kind of just some of the main numbers here, I'd give in the names and kind of knowing some of the players, I'd give the edge to the Braves. But again, I know you'll talk about some statistics in a second that may tell a different story here, offensive-wise. Braves definitely had more power. One guy in their regular starting lineup with under 10 homers. Mets had 3 guys with under 10 homers. So, I'd probably give the edge to the Braves, but I know you're going to say the stats say otherwise here as far as how they fared in their league that year.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, remember, we're looking at the starting lineups of these two teams, and I think when you look a little deeper, a different picture maybe arises. If you look at batting average, the Mets hit 263 as a team. That was number 1 in the National League that year. The Braves hit 250, which was 13th in the National League. The Mets only had 20 fewer home runs than the Braves. The Mets hit 148 home runs, which was 3rd in the league. Braves hit 168, which was 2 in the league. Stolen bases, the Mets stole 118 bases, which was 10th in the league. The Braves only stole 73, which was 12th. Runs scored, the Mets led the league in runs scored with 783. The Braves were ninth in the league with 645. The Mets had 1,462 hits as a team. That was first in the National League. Braves had 1,202, which was 13th. Mets on-base percentage was .339, which was first in the league. Braves was .326, which was 10th. And the slugging percentage of the Mets was .401, first in the league. Braves was .409, which was fourth in the league. So when you compare all the hitters, not just the starting lineup, you see a little bit of a different picture come through. And again, we're talking about 9 years difference there, which is not tremendous difference in league, tradition or league happenings or league philosophies. The Mets do come across as maybe a little bit more of an overall better offensive team. Maybe they don't have the power that the Braves do at any particular time, but overall maybe a little bit better hitting team.
Yeah. I agree with that. For what it's worth, I give the managerial edge to the Braves, Bobby Cox.
Right.
One of the, I don't know where he is on the list, but a lot of wins in his career. Let's take a look at kind of the series here, the games we play out, because we typically do that. So
let's do one other thing too that I wanted to mention that I think we looked at was if you look at since it's obviously so tough to pick when we get to this level. If you look at their two World Series, okay. First of all, let's look at the Braves. The Braves were a pretty powerful team during the 90s, right? I mean, they started this run in 91. They lost the World Series to the Twins, lost the World Series in 92 to the Blue Jays, lost the NLCS to the Phillies in 93. Of course, 94 was the strike season. 95, they won the World Series. 96, they lost to the Yankees. 97, they lost to the... they didn't make the World Series in 97. 98, they lost to the... in the NLCS, and then 99 they lost to the Yankees. My point being, they were only able to get it done once.
Yeah.
The Braves, the Mets were kind of in the same boat. The Mets had a very good team in the early 80s, 84, 85, 86, 87, all the way through 89, and again could only get it done once. So that is a pretty comparable thing. Look at their two World Series. I mean, the Braves won the World Series 4-2 over the Indians, and the Mets won the World Series 4-3 over the Red Sox. I think you would agree that Cleveland Indians had a pretty powerful lineup.
They did.
Pretty good roster, right? But if you look at the way the series went, Maddox and Glavine, pretty much, they won the first two games. They jumped out to a 2-0 lead. The Indians won the third game. The Braves won the fourth game to go up 3-1. The Indians won the fifth game, and then Glavine threw a gem in Game 6, winning 1-0 on David Justice's home run. The Mets, on the other hand, lost both games to the Red Sox in New York in the first two games of the series, with Ron Darling losing 1-0. And then Dwight Gooden losing 9-3. The Mets came back to win 2 out of 3 in Boston with their third and fourth starters. And then Gooden came back and lost again in Game 5 in Boston. So I guess I bring all that up to say, I think you have to look at Glavine and Smoltz, or not Glavine, Smoltz, Glavine and Maddox as being the two guys that, to me, if they get out, they're going to give you Game 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a given. The Mets, on the other hand, I think are more likely. If they can get the series deep in games, I think they're more likely with their deeper bullpen and with their starters like Fernandez and Ojeda to be able to win the series later, unless they get way behind, 3-0 or 3-1. So yeah, go ahead. Now I just wanted to throw that out as a point of comparison.
So Game 1, Maddox and Gooden,
right, in New York.
I'd still give that to Maddox.
Got to, yeah.
Especially that season, losing 2 games and 1.60 ERA. And Gooden, as you pointed out, lost 2 games in the World Series. He didn't win a game in the playoffs. Is that correct?
That's correct. He lost a game in the playoffs, and his other start in the playoffs, no decision.
Okay. So as good of a pitcher as he was, they can really rely on him for a win in the playoffs.
That's right.
Saying something, I think. So Game 2, Glavine and Darling. What do we think there? Give that to Glavine?
Yeah, I mean, of course, then again, Ron Darling pitched really well in the World Series. I think he pitched really well in the World Series.
That's in New York. So.
That's in New York. I mean, but again, Glavine was a crafty pitcher. He would paint that outside corner, and he wouldn't go away from it. I mean, even if it was called a ball, he would just keep going to that outside corner. Mm-hmm. So I'm even willing to give Glavine that game.
Yeah.
2-0 Braves.
Okay, so Smoltz and Ojeda.
Yeah, and I think that's where I probably would go with Ojeda, only because of he's got an ERA under 3, and Smoltz. I just don't see him. I don't see the Braves being able to hit Ojeda.
Yeah. All right, so game 4, we're assuming they'll go with their 4th starters.
Avery, right?
So Avery and Sid Fernandez.
Yeah, and I think
you give that to Fernandez, right?
I would give that to Fernandez, yeah. So I think that ties the series up 2-2. Now we come back to Game 5, which is still in Atlanta, and you got Greg Maddux again against Dwight Gooden. And I think here is where the series is won or lost, and let me explain what I mean. In the World Series against the Indians, Maddux won Game 1 with a shutout. In Game 5 when he came back, the Indians hit him pretty well, all right? And the Indians were a powerful roster, okay? Yeah. The Mets also have a very good hitting roster. Maybe not top to bottom as good as the Indians. My point being, I think when you get into a short series, especially the World Series, with 2 teams as good as this, I think you have to favor the hitters the second time around. Yeah. And I think Gooden against Maddux, I think Gooden would be able to give the Mets enough innings there where the bullpen could take over and possibly win that game.
That's a good point. I think you read some of the stats. The Mets leading the National League in a lot of offensive categories that season.
Right.
Eventually they're going to have their day.
Right.
And,
right.
Especially when they start seeing guys the second time around.
Right.
So that's a good point as well. So
now the Mets would be up 3 games to 2.
You have Glavine and Darling again.
Back in New York, right. And I think the same thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think the same thing applies there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Maybe say that if we said Darling wins, what did we say? Glavine wins the first game?
Glavine won the first game, yeah.
So they could go either way, really.
It could. I'm willing to concede to 1 or 2 particular outcomes. Going back to New York 3-2, and the Mets winning that game, Darling giving them enough innings to win the series 4-2, or even Glavine winning that game and the Braves tying the series up 3-3. But if you get into a Game 7, your starters are probably going to be Bob Ojeda against John Smoltz, but then everybody's in the bullpen, all right? And I think if everybody's in the bullpen and you got guys like Gooden that can give you an inning, Fernandez can give you an inning, Aguilera can give you some innings, Orozco and McDowell, I just think the Mets bullpen and their hitters, I think, would give them the edge in a Game 7.
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is kind of 2 ways. One, you talk about the Braves pitching staff being 1 in all those categories. Okay. The Mets were, I think, 1 through 3 in a lot.
They were.
So very good staffs. But I think from top to bottom, the Mets lineup is better than the Braves lineup.
Right.
Especially when you look at how they fared in their own league that year.
Right.
So I think the Mets lineup versus the Braves pitching
is more likely to get to them quicker.
Right.
So, yeah.
Even though you have Maddux was an all-time ace for the Braves, especially when you take into account the bullpen and other pitchers. Second thing is, we talked about the Braves in the 90s a little bit here. If we're talking about this series as a championship series in our bracket or whatever, the Braves were only able to win a series like that one time.
Right.
They lost in 91, 92, 96.
Right.
96, 99.
Right.
So you have to start, and then they were a good team. They won 14 division championships in a row, I think.
Right.
So why couldn't they win more than one? Something, maybe they weren't as clutch as they should be. I don't know.
Right.
But in a big series like this, maybe you hold that against them. Although the Mets had their series lost against the Red Sox, it wasn't for Buckner, so you could go either way there, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it was that plays into your hitting thing, right? Maybe the Braves could win a lot of games year after year in 162 games, but maybe they didn't have, when they face excellent pitching in the postseason, maybe sometimes the lineup wasn't good enough to overcome it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because they don't face those type of pitching staffs day in and day out through the season, right?
That's true, but something I also think. I think the Braves ended up winning the first 2 games in Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken, or was it in Atlanta? It was in Atlanta. It was in Atlanta. They won the first 2 games in Atlanta, and then went to Cleveland. Okay, and then came back and won the series 4 games too. The Mets, on the other hand, remember, lost the first 2 games of the World Series at home. And I really believe in my heart that a team that can come back from that, all right, losing the first two games of a World Series at home, when you go back to the stadium of the team that just beat you, all they got to win is 2 out of 3 on their home diamond, and they couldn't do it. And then you look at the '96 Yankees; they lost the first 2 at home to Maddox and Smoltz, and then won 4 straight. I think to me that's a clutch baseball team. That's a team that doesn't succumb to the pressure, is able to go on the road in a huge situation of the World Series and be able to, if not win all 3, win at least 2 of those 3 games on the opponent's field. So personally, if you ask me my assessment, I would go with the '86 Mets, and I'm willing to say 7 games.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. I'm okay with that. I don't disagree there. Based on what we talked about.
Okay. All right. So the 1986 New York Mets will advance, and we'll go 4 games to 3, and they were the 2 seed. So we have one of our finalists. The 1986 New York Mets come out of the National League side of the bracket as the greatest National League World Series winner, in our opinion,
in the last 50 years.
In the last 50 years. That's correct. Obviously, not everybody out there is going to agree with us, so we want to hear from you. I mean, obviously, if everybody agreed with us, we ought to start selling this thing and making some money off it. But obviously, we don't have that. So yeah, tell us what you think. Are we way off? I mean, what do you think? And the best way to do that is through Twitter. @PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. We'll take a break here and get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll come back with the American League side of the bracket.
Let's take a quick break to tell you about our sponsor, Bonus Room Art. Head to bonusroomart.com today to look at some great art prints of sports and movies. You can pick up prints at their store. Also, don't forget to follow them on Instagram @bonusroomart to see some great progress that they're making in all the new art they're producing. All right, time for the American League semifinal matchup, and Nathan has the details for us.
All right, we have the 1-seeded 1998 Yankees face off against the 2nd-seed 1970 Baltimore Orioles. 98 Yankees won 114 games, lost 48, first in the AL East. They swept the divisional series in 3 games over the Texas Rangers, won the championship series 4-2 over the Cleveland Indians, and they swept the World Series in 4 games over the San Diego Padres. The 1970 Orioles won 108 games, lost 54, first in the AL East. They swept the championship series in 3 games over the Minnesota Twins, and they won the World Series 4-1 over the Cincinnati Reds.
All right. So, you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I'll start us off on this one. We always like to start with pitching. I think that's an obvious good place to start. The 1970 Baltimore Orioles. Hard to overlook that pitching staff. 3 guys: Jim Palmer won 20 games, Mike Cuellar won 24 games, Dave McNally won 24 games. 3 20-game winners. Palmer with a 2.71 ERA, Cuellar 3.48, and McNally 3.22. Interesting thing about that staff, the 1970 Baltimore Orioles were the only team in Major League Baseball history that had 3 pitchers finish in the top 5 of the Cy Young voting, which I think is just absolutely phenomenal when you think about it. I mean,
yeah, it's unheard of.
It's unheard of. Yeah. Obviously, the only team that's ever done that. Interesting. While we're talking about this, Nathan, and we should know this, but who won the Cy Young Award in 1970 in the American League?
Let's see here.
But anyway, go ahead. Finish your point, Joseph.
Yeah, I was going to say that's impressive when you think of some of the staffs. We just talked about Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox. They never did it.
Right.
Even this past year, like Verlander, Cole, and Greinke. 3 guys that have either won it before or are capable. Go ahead.
1970 AL Cy Young was Jim Perry.
Jim Perry for the Cleveland Indians?
Minnesota Twins.
Okay. And what was his record, did it say?
24 wins and 12 losses.
Okay, so how good must Perry have been
Yeah.
for one of these guys to not win? But here they probably took votes away from each other.
Yeah.
Probably what happened.
Yeah, Dave McNally was second in the voting.
Right.
And then you had Sam McDowell from Cleveland third, Mike Cuellar,
and then Palmer,
then Clyde Wright, Ron Perrance.
Right.
So you had 2 Minnesota guys in there too.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So anyway, like I said, the only team in Major League Baseball history with 3 pitchers in the top 5. Their team, the they also had the fourth lowest opponent's batting average against all time. 235. Opponents hit 235 against the Orioles staff. So yeah, they were obviously top notch.
Right. Then looking at the Yankees here, they had three pitchers with 16 or more wins, which is nothing to sneeze at. You don't see that a ton. Then look at fourth and fifth starters at 13 and 12.
Right.
Whereas the Orioles fourth and fifth 6 and 5.
Right.
So a little more well rounded. A lot of postseason experience.
Right.
We've talked about El Duque's postseason prowess. Always seems to come up big. Same with Pettit. We've talked about that before. Closing matchup. Obviously, no brainer. Rivera, 36 saves compared to just 13 for
Reichert.
And then the bullpen. I think that just look at some of the ERAs. The Orioles had a lower bullpen ERA among their top relievers: 308, 208, 325. Yankees a little bit higher, 325, 547, 379. Bullpen may be kind of a wash there. I don't know.
I think it probably may have been, but remember we talked about this in one of our earlier shows too. The 70 Orioles didn't have to deal with a designated hitter.
That's right.
Whereas the Yankees did. Which makes a little difference when you talk about bullpen ERAs. And you look at a guy like Graham Lloyd, that left-hander, 1.67 ERA. I mean, if you have a left-handed hitter that you want to get out, Graham Lloyd was the guy to get him out that year. Stanton wasn't bad, but his ERA was
a left-handed hitter like Boog Powell, perhaps.
A left-handed hitter like Boog Powell, perhaps. That's exactly right.
MVP.
That's exactly right. And Eldrod Hendricks, who had a pretty good year as well behind the plate, but he was also a lefty. I think staff-wise, you give it a little bit of an edge to the Orioles' top three starters, but it's hard to sneeze at guys like Pettit, Wells, and Cone. When you look at Wells and Cone, both threw perfect games that year, which is pretty interesting. And Andy Pettit, we all know who Andy Pettit is. I mean, the guy's got the most postseason wins as a pitcher in Major League Baseball history. So, he was definitely a clutch pitcher. But
before we touch on the lineups here, manager-wise, are you going with Torrey or Earl Weaver?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Usually the manager, we felt it's somewhat one-sided, but this is a pretty
even one. Torrey, the Orioles, that was really the start of the Orioles' greatness, if you will. I mean, from 1970 to about 1983, the Orioles were one of the class teams in Major League Baseball. Yeah. But before that, they struggled a little bit, and I think Earl Weaver maybe hit his stride here during this season.
Same with the Yankees.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Joe Torre, but Joe Torre did manage the '96 Yankees to the World Series, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he managed the St. Louis Cardinals to the playoffs. I may be wrong about that, but I don't know. I mean, hard to say. Hard to say.
Yeah, so we can call it even. Yeah,
even.
So, looking at the lineups, the Yankees, I think, just from top to bottom, you've got more guys that can hurt you, and you had a stat that they had a different leader for categories for the following categories, right?
Yes, the Yankees had a different team leader in home runs, batting average, hits, total bases, and walks.
Yeah, that's
pretty strong.
That's amazing. Yeah. So, if the Orioles, on the other hand, we talked about Boog Powell, MVP, Frank Robinson, former MVP, but then just a lot of guys and Brooks Robinson, strong year as well. And of course, I don't have their leaders off the top of my head, but probably not as well versed as the Yankees in terms of who can hurt you.
Yeah.
And
a couple other things to look at too. I mean, you look at you got to factor in the bench for these teams as well. And the Yankees bench had a better on base percentage than their starters did. I mean, it was .370 versus the starters .364, which I think is pretty amazing. And I think if you look at their team speed, they had way more stolen bases than the Orioles did.
Right.
Obviously, a more well-rounded offensive team. They led the league in runs scored, but no player hit more than 28 home runs on that team, which tells you that there was a lot of guys contributing to that, getting on base and contributing. So
Defensively, you give that to the Orioles, correct?
without a doubt, yeah. I think when we were talking before we went on the air, I read an article that I'm assuming was based on statistics, but I didn't check it to see if it was. But the 1970 Orioles are considered as arguably the greatest defensive team in Major League Baseball history.
Right.
And when you look at guys like Brooks Robinson at third, Paul Blair in center field, Mark Belanger, as light of a hitter as he was as good a shortstop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, and Boog Powell, I mean, for a big guy that played first base, he was pretty good there too. So yeah, so the Orioles had a really good defensive team. They're not gonna beat themselves that way.
All right, so let's break down the series here.
Yeah, let's break it down.
Let's say Pettit versus
Palmer in Game 1.
Well, I guess they could theoretically pick who they wanted to start.
They could. They
three guys,
could.
or the Orioles especially.
They could. Yeah, they could. I guess let's go with the way they finished in the Cy Young. How's that?
Okay.
So it would be Pettit against McNally in Game 1. That game would be in New York, and as good a pitcher as McNally is, I think I would give that matchup to Pettit. I mean, because he's clutch when it comes to the playoffs, and hard to beat in Yankee Stadium as well.
Right.
So I probably would give that one to Pettit.
Mm-hmm.
And then Game 2, we'd go with Mike Cuellar, another lefty. And that's another thing to look at. Both Pettit and McNally are lefties. You look at the Yankees lineup, we talked a little bit about this. The Yankees had basically would only have 3 left-handers because Posada's a switch hitter and Bernie Williams. So they would have more righties to go against McNally. Whereas if you look at the Orioles lineup, they would have, the same. They would only have 2 lefties, so that pretty much balances itself out there.
Right.
But yeah, I'd have to go with Pettit at Yankee Stadium in Game 1. A very, very close game. Not a lot of runs scored.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, and then I'll let you analyze Game 2. Would be in New York with David Wells, another lefty, against Mike Cuellar, another lefty.
Yeah, so lefty and lefty there. I think probably give that one to Cuellar, perhaps.
Okay.
Won 24 games that season.
Right.
He's gonna. I don't see with that pitching staff, the Orioles starters. I don't see them getting out of the first 2 games to 0 wins.
Right.
So
Right. I agree.
We'll give that one to him.
I agree.
Game 3, you have David Cohn and who's left? McNally?
Jim Palmer.
Jim Palmer.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
yeah.
So, again, Palmer, all-time great pitcher.
And he'd be at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you maybe give that one to Palmer.
I would. Now we go to Game 4.
Yeah. So that's where you got Hernandez,
El Duque,
who always you're going to feel like is going to keep you in the game and potentially come up big versus maybe either Jim Harden or Tom Phoebus.
Right, Tom Phoebus, yeah.
You got to give that one to El Duque.
Got to give that and even if El Duque doesn't go really deep in the game, he's going to, as you said, he's going to keep you in it until one of those Yankee hitters get the big hit. So that evens the series up at 2-2. Now we got Game 5 still in Baltimore, and I guess we're back to Dave McNally against Andy Pettit.
Yeah. You could argue either way here, but I think if you got Pettit the most postseason wins of all time, I think he finds a way to get it done again.
I think so.
Now, part of that is because the wild card era and expansion.
Right.
The playoffs, he's going to pitch in more games, whereas the Orioles, they just had to win their AL Championship Series and then play the World Series. But still, it's not a lot of guys have been in the wild card era and don't have the wins that Pettit has.
That's right. And Pettit's the kind of guy where you can't really look at statistics. I mean, he's just got that bulldog mentality. So that would put the Yankees up 3-2 going back to New York for Game 6, which would be Mike Cuellar against David Wells.
Well, I think you could almost have your answer there. I mean, if the Yankees are up 3-2,
right,
going back to Yankee Stadium,
right,
they're not going to lose 2 games.
No, they're not. No,
with Jeter and Paul O'Neill and Bernie Williams. They just don't allow that to happen.
Right. I agree with
especially in Yankee Stadium. So
I
I
agree
think
with
the
that.
only question is 6 or 7 games.
Yeah, I'm willing to go 6. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I think the Yankees lineup top to bottom, and we talked a little bit about this in the National League matchup. The Yankees lineup top to bottom is so strong that it's hard for any staff to shut them down to win 4 games.
Right.
To be able to win 4 games, and that's why I think the Yankees win this one, and I think they probably win it 4 games too.
Yeah. Sounds good to me too.
All right,
So that leaves us with the
So that leaves
New
us with,
York matchup.
New York. Start spreading the news, right? New York. So we got the 1998 New York Yankees advancing to the ultimate showdown. They were the 1 seed.
That's right.
So we have an all New York showdown in our Champions Bracket World Series 1970 to 2019. The best American League World Series champion in the last 50 years, we feel, is the 1998 New York Yankees. So let us know. Do you agree with that? Are we off base? Was there a better team out there that we missed? And the best way to let us know that is on Twitter. You can subscribe to the Press Box Podcast on iTunes, and you can follow us on Twitter at PressBoxPod. So that wraps up our semifinal matchup. We have the, once again, in our Champions final matchup, the championship, which will be this coming Thursday. The 1998 New York Yankees, the first seed, will take on the 1986 New York Mets, the first seed. Or excuse me, the second seed. So, Joseph, another good round. I mean, it's been exciting, and we'll have to really do our homework on that last one, though. I mean, it's 2 pretty good baseball teams there.
Right. Yeah. One matchup to find out the champion. A lot of ways you can dig deep and look at various statistics. We'll have to find out which ones are most relevant, and we look forward to talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a situation like the movie The Internship. I mean, I could binge you about physics or various physical phenomena. Same thing here. I mean, we can throw out any statistic as you want, but what it comes down to is gut feel. Who's going to have the hot hand? Who's the best pitcher in that situation? And we look forward to discussing that on the next Press Box Podcast.